Welcome back, everybody, to the Voices of Delphi podcast. My name is Makayla Davis.
And I am Sarah France, and we are two women joined together by a mutual love for all things mystical, magical, and metaphysical. This podcast is dedicated to conversations that bridge the mundane with the esoteric in the hopes of reintegrating ancient wisdom back into the modern day and reawakening the oracle within. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please like, share, subscribe, as it helps me and Makayla continue to bring the content that you love back to your For You page. All right, Makayla, welcome back. Week
Hey,
6.
I can't believe time is flying.
I know we're doing it.
Yeah,
We're moving and grooving.
I know. It's amazing. So today, everybody, Sarah and I are very excited to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is going to cover the moon in essence, and specifically because today we're celebrating the Capricorn full moon. It is June 29th to 26th, the day that we're recording it, which happens to be quite an interesting day in the sky anyway, because we've got Mercury stationing retrograde. Jupiter's going to be moving into Leo for another year. But, specifically today, we want to focus on the moon cycle and the moon cycle today, the full moon in Capricorn, and what it means to embody the moon. So, how are you feeling? Very lunar right now, Sarah?
I am feeling very lunar. Anybody who knows me or any of my students out there who are listening who have taken my courses knows that I am absolutely obsessed with the moon. I love talking about her. I love unraveling all of her mysterious layers because if you know anything about the moon, you know that she's a mystery. And I think that I guess you could say, not necessarily a more modern context of astrology and esoteric study, but maybe a more pop astrology version of the moon that's kind of predominated, I think has done a huge disservice to getting into the real juicy heart of what the moon is actually about,
Mm-hmm.
esoterically, astrologically, because she is so, so much more than just your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that being said, I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, amen. So let me ask you then, I'll have you open this up because we were having an amazing conversation and agreement, which is super important on the meaning of the moon and the astrology chart and how we embody it. So do you want to kind of open up that conversation?
Sure, sure, absolutely. So, I guess the first thing that comes to mind that I want to touch on is whenever I teach on the planets, I always like to bring emphasis both to how these planets present in the organic world, because I think it's important to understand that so much of the correspondence and signification that they receive was motivated and inspired by an ancient world that was very observant of what was happening in the natural environment, right? So much more than I think us modern humans can even appreciate. So I want to start with that and then also talking about the glyph that's associated with the moon, right? I think that understanding the glyphs is an area of study that I think so many people kind of gloss over. They don't realize like how much richness and wealth of information can be found just in looking at that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'll start with not the mundane, but the organic manifestation of the moon and what she represents. So obviously, in one way, we have this moon that is a satellite to Earth, right? And we know beyond reasonable doubt, it's been proven that the moon came from Earth herself, right? That Earth was struck by a meteor or some foreign object, and that the moon actually kind of projectiled off of Earth and then caught orbit around Earth and became our satellite. And so, in this way, we have this kind of connotation with the moon that talks about like the primordial essence of bonding, right? About being released from something and then always being a part of it, right? Always being contained in orbit around it. And so inherent in that is this, correlation that the moon has with mother child, right? Or any kind of deeply emotionally and physically bonded relationship. So we have that component. And then we also have this idea that I like to mention how the moon, she is in essence sovereign and all her own, and also in some ways entirely dependent, right, on another object, i.e., the sun, right? If it were not for the light and energy that the moon receives from the sun, we would potentially not even know that she existed, right? She would forever remain invisible from our vantage point here on Earth. And so, moonlight is, in essence, its own substance, right? It's silvery and it's soft in nature. It's nothing like sunlight. And yet, all it is sunlight reflected, right? And so, all of the different areas of, you know, I guess, experience and questioning that are associated with the lunar principle are kind of mysterious and dualistic in this way, right? There's kind of this illusory or transformative quality to them. And so, in this way, the moon is deeply associated with the illusion of duality, the illusion of impermanence, right? In the same way that the lunar cycle presents this physical manifestation of waxing and waning, ebbing and flowing, planting a seed, growing it, watching it blossom and bloom, and then slowly decay and fade away into nothingness, right? And so it's really interesting to think about and conceptualize how the sun esoterically and astrologically kind of talks about source energy or the one, right? This infinite spiritual fountain, and how the moon, as the sun's counterpart, represents the illusion of our separateness from that infinite source, right? The illusion of life and death, right? The illusion of anything but infinity.
Mm-hmm.
And how, in the same way, the moon takes up correspondence with the gestation cycle, the life cycle, life, death, impermanence, waxing, waning, and also the physical body, right? As the physical body is, I guess, our most profound experience of impermanence as human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess before I go into the glyph, I feel like I want to give you an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about maybe your perspective or anything that comes to mind with any of these things.
I'm just like swoon listening to you right now. It's very lunar. I'm just like, yes, yes, it's so embodied. It's so flowing and nurturing for her. Um, yeah, I mean, I want to keep you on a rolling, but one of the things that I wrote down that you were talking about was this bonding dynamic going on, and through the evolutionary lens, we do look at one aspect of moon, Cancer, fourth house archetype, because we look at things in the Trinity through the EA lens of this area of your life, or this area in your astrology chart, as being this intimate, internal, inner space, this protective inner space that has been conditioned by your early life bonds. And that's going to include your parental figures, your literal society that you grew up in, the neighborhood that you grew up in. All these other factors leave imprints and are a part of that conditioning that you felt. But the biggest thing, the biggest relationship that I will focus on when I'm doing evolutionary work with somebody is what is the relationship that you had, and what is the bond that you did or do not have with a parental figure, because that is going to shape how you're connecting with your inner world. All right. And that will in turn interpret this process of how the moon goes through these phases of ebbs and flows. Am I connected? Am I not? Am I showing light? Am I not? And we can correlate that to these feelings of safety and security, or a lack thereof, and the importance of going along your evolutionary journey in your life and learning about your chart and learning about what does the moon in your chart symbolize for you, how you seek and you find this emotional bond and this safety and security. And I'm sure we'll get into it. I want to continue with the glyph and stuff because you're on a roll here. And the further I go down has to kind of do with bringing in the Capricorn archetype, and even Taurus and Virgo as a part of this process for the evolutionary journey for the lunar figure. But to bring it back down, this bonding dynamic is so important because the moon will correlate to how we're bonding with our relationships. And Libra and Aries also play a massive role in the Cancer archetype and the moon archetype, because these relationships will leave imprints on us, essentially. And if you can think about your most significant relationships, it doesn't even have to be your parents. Like some of us have not had parents growing up. I'm one of them, right? But my grandparents were figures. And then down the line, very close significant others. All these people leave bonds and imprints on the emotional inner world that you have, which is very interesting how you talk about, the sun only reflects the part of the moon. So if you think the sun is only reflecting the light that we're carrying in our inner world, and how we protect that so much. And at certain times, there's going to be certain people or experiences that will illuminate those parts of our inner world. And the older we get, the more imprints, the more things that we have to show when that light does get shown, which can be a very sensitive topic or a sensitive dynamic when we're doing this emotional work. And, a lot of the things that come up when I'm focusing on a client's chart, when I'm looking specifically at the moon's relationship here, which is extremely important in relationship to the nodes of fate as well, is, this word regression that is we use a lot in EA with Cancer archetype, the moon archetype, because the moon is also not only signifying your inner world, but it's holding this memory that you've had through all these experiences, through all these feelings and emotions up until this point, with these people, with these relationships. And so because the moon holds memory, because the light is reflected from the sun, there is always going to be this dynamic of regression that gets illuminated, and you go through different things, like different cosmic transits. A full moon, we regress, right? We have the full moon in Capricorn today. We're all regressing in some way or another with the Capricorn themes in our chart. Next month it'll be a full moon in Aquarius, and we're going to regress over the Aquarian themes over our chart. And it's very subconscious, like that's why I'm glad we're talking about this topic, because just like the sun affects us, the moon is just as equally effective, right? So that's why I love that we're bringing this up, because if you pay attention to the symbols in your life of how you're feeling and moving, you will actually understand that your moon is so much more significant to your inner ego and your inner identity than it is the sun. And the sun is only here to kind of play your personality through and act your personality through. But when you connect to your moon sign, this is really your inner world. This is who you're letting those important people in. This is who you will show when you feel safe enough to expose yourself. And this is also the part of your psyche that you will protect the most in your chart. So I'll land my plane there, but give it back to you.
Absolutely. So many good points. So many good points, especially like this idea of regression, right? I think that's such a good point that you make, especially we'll get into this when we start talking a little bit more about the lunar cycle, but I have such a bone to pick with this messaging that's kind of been popularized over the last few years on social media and stuff about how full moons are moments of like release in some ways, or like, and I'm like, no, they're moments of complete illumination of that which was previously hidden, right? Whether that was a memory, whether that was an experience or something that was still in the gestation period, right? Within the womb, whether that is physical or metaphorical in nature, it's an illumination of something that was previously hidden. It is not a time of release. But anyways, I'll I'll digress for the time being. But yeah, this idea of reflection, right? In the same way that the moon quite literally is constantly in this process of reflecting sunlight, The moon is deeply associated with anything that involves having to go back into our stores of information and experience from the past, right? So, whether that's, quite literally just recalling what you had for dinner on Tuesday night, or whether that is viscerally remembering, the death of a loved one or a joyous, happy moment. You graduated college or you bought your first car, whatever it is, right? All of that experiencing is extremely lunar in nature. And another thing that I wanted to talk about before getting into the glyph is how it's important to remember that no matter how much light the moon receives from our vantage point here on Earth, 50% of her will forever remain hidden. We will never see an entire side of the moon. And so it's a very interesting thing to meditate on, how the part that we are able to see of her is the cyclical nature of her, the waxing and waning, the ebbing and flowing, the growing and decaying, right? That is what we are able to see of her. But that there is 50% of her that will forever remain hidden. And in this way, the moon is deeply associated with all things occult and with the pursuit of the knowledge and answers to those mysteries of life and death, right? I see it time and time again. People ask me all the time, like, what's a witchy placement in astrology? The moon, right? Having the moon prominently placed in your chart, right? Having her on an angle, having her in Taurus or in Cancer, right? Having her conjunct a personal planet, whatever it might be, because the lunar principle is inherently wrapped up in an awareness and a dealing with and a experiencing of those mysteries of life and death, right? And what is occult wisdom and knowledge other than the pursuit of answers to questions that arguably human beings might not even be able to get the answers to or should have the answers to, right? Because ultimately it's this experiencing of duality and impermanence that kind of puts a fire under our ass to actually live a life well lived, right? And do something with ourselves. Because otherwise, if we knew that everything, was just a figment of our imagination and we would continue on in the ether forever and ever, right? Like we wouldn't have that ego drive to actually do something. And so I think, that's where she gets her association with the occult, right? And in some ways, those lunar pursuits are pursuits that might not ever come to full illumination, right? We might not ever be able to fully ascertain all of the information about her mysteries that we want to. And I feel like that's a good segue into this conversation that Makayla and I were talking about earlier, which I know is going to piss some people off, but you know what? I'm feeling like I'm in the mood for it, which is that I deeply, deeply feel, and I think Makayla will echo this, that the sun astrologically is not your ego, that we have done a huge disservice to the sun, to Aries, to Leo, right? These kind of solar signs, saying that the sun is egoic, right? If anything, Mars is more egoic than the sun. Um, but actually, when we look at the esoteric meaning of the sun and the moon, right? It's really the moon that creates these ego drives because if we get now into the glyph, the moon is, obviously, and we can insert the picture afterwards in the show notes, but the moon is a glyph of a crescent moon, which is like in one way quite obvious, right? Duh, it's a moon, but also it's comprised of one of the three alchemical symbols that are associated with all of the planetary glyphs, which is going to be the circle of spirit, right? The semicircle of soul, keyword, and the cross of matter. So the sun is used, or it's comprised of two whole circles, right? A circle inside of a circle. And in this way, it talks about how the sun is a representation of the continuity of the divine, of infinity, right? Through your particular anchor point what your spirit, what your divine anchor is in this lifetime, and how you continue that creative expansiveness outward. In this way, the sun is very much associated with the individuation of the self in order to pursue a higher calling, right? But the moon is this experience of when the spirit becomes fractal, right? When we have a part of spirit that gets fractioned off and put into a physical vessel, i.e., the body, creating this sense of separation, this illusion of division, this illusion of impermanence. And inherent in that is a deep sense of lack. Right? That there is something that we are searching to return to this one, to return to this divinity, this sense of belonging. And when we think about from a psychological perspective, ego drives and desires, so much of it is fueled by this sense of lack, right? So much of what the ego does is because it feels like it is lacking in resources and power and respect, whatever it might be, right? And so the symbol, the glyph of the moon is not just meant to represent the moon itself, right? This physical representation of her, but it's also meant to represent, her as a vessel, right? Her as a vessel for the spirit. And also this idea of, a separation or an inherent missing piece, right? A missing piece that is created by the illusion of being embodied, right? And I guess the final thing that I'll mention before ending my tangent is this. There's a reason why the semicircle is said to be associated with the soul, right? Because we talk about, like, for example, oh, your soul will carry on after death, but really, nobody really wants to hear this. But I don't know that that's true, because I think that the soul is a piece of the divine that's being filtered through a physical body, right? But once the physical body dies, the soul is no longer, it's your spirit that carries on, but your spirit carries no identity, right? And I don't know, maybe you have, some different perspective on this, Makayla, as a psychic medium, right? Quite literally, you're convening with spirit on a daily basis. But, I do think it's interesting to think about that differentiation that we make in alchemical and esoteric studies of the spirit is one thing and soul is another. Soul is dependent upon being in a body, right? But spirit is infinite. It is everywhere, all together, all at once.
No, that was a beautiful, beautiful way to explain the symbol of the moon. And with evolutionary astrology, moon is so connected to the purpose of the evolution of ourself, which we look at Pluto, the significator of that, and then the journey, the arc development of the soul is through the lunar nodes, but then the ego of the lunar nodes of that arc development is through that moon's lens. And I'll put up the symbol of Pluto as well, because we also use the symbol of spirit, which is the circle inside at the very top of the symbol of Pluto, which then the moon, which is the ego consciousness, we call it the bridge, the connection bridge, that is suspending the spirit. And the cross of matter is depicted underneath that connection bridge, which is signified by Saturn, because that's when we actually meet the physical world and the physical reality, or when soul reincarnates into the physical world and the physical reality. So you'll see the moon symbol. My point here is you'll see the moon symbol in so many ways. That it's very subliminal. I don't think maybe even other astrologers or maybe new astrologers actually realize how it's connected into other planetary dynamics and other planetary symbols, and why it's so important. And then, as far as the reincarnation thing goes, I would agree with you that, and it's because I have felt this from a deep personal level myself, because I have reached levels and depths into my soul's capacity where I could actually see the difference of what my soul has been trying to manifest in this lifetime, and then my personality, my ego, my personality, Makayla. it's funneling through, and how the two are separate. And that is one thing I love about astrology. And I find a lot of people, when they get really deep with their chart, is they have this awakening where they can really understand what is leading them, their ego, these unconscious, subconscious things, these emotional drives. Because in a way, the way you'll emotionally react to things at times is your moon. And if you're not aware that that is operating at a different level than your soul capacity, right, you're going to be operating straight from that ego lens, good or bad, right? And when people and get into this deep work, they do that uncovering, they start to expose themselves, which the chart, as you know, can tell you where your shadows, your flaws are, and they can make meaning of things that you've actually manifested in your life that are quite difficult, which is the best way. If you're listening to this and you're in like a difficult time in your life, like, trust me, honey, that is the best time to be in, because now you're having this illumination and this awakening of the difference between your soul's journey and purpose in this life and your little ego baby self who's just making it extra difficult for you, right? And so I was able to suspend, and I'll never forget this moment. It was in my mediumship school as well. I was like in the middle of it. It had nothing to do with that really, but I felt this divine connection from myself to source energy, which is, where I believe we also reincarnate from, as you had stated. And we reincarnate over time and time again. We're just broken off little facades of God and Goddess. If you think about it on a major scale, we're all brother and sister, if you will, which is kind of weird. But, I felt this channeling down from God, from spirit, from source, and I had never felt so much more love and so much connection. And I was so able to see my little Cancer ego self with all of her little needs, and was able to come down and really understand that. So yes, I agree with you on that. Just I needed to paint a picture in like this very connected way, if you will, like from a personal experience to kind of translate how that might feel for somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up the Pluto glyph as
Mm.
well, because Pluto's glyph is so fascinating to talk about. I always refer to it as the spirit untethered,
Mm.
because I find that like these Plutonic experiences, right? Pluto is the one who comes in to expose the soft underbelly, right?
Yep.
Pluto will expose you. It will strip you of any false sense of security, right? Of any
Mm.
false sense of control. And oftentimes it will go straight for the jugular of your physical reality, right? So
Mm-hmm.
many people who go through Pluto on the angles, for example, it's like shit is happening in their physical world, right? And so it's interesting to think about with the glyph of Pluto, like when we project it, people will see how we have the circle of spirit that is kind of floating
Mm-hmm.
above the semicircle and the cross of matter. And like, what more than the absolute loss of everything that gives you a sense of safety and security in your physical world, that which is represented by the moon and by Saturn,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those two symbols below the circle of spirit, like what purifies the spirit more and untethers the spirit more, frees it more than
Mm-hmm.
the realization that like you can lose everything and still go on, that
Mm-hmm.
you can lose absolutely every sense and semblance of control, and yet you still find that your heart is beating and you still have a purpose and you can pick yourself back up and go on. Like being purified in that way. It's like very much the experience that people talk about when they have near death experiences,
Mm-hmm.
right? Pluto as this planet of death and the underworld, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where people oftentimes like will talk about, I had a near death experience and I came back and now like I've been freed from,
Mm-hmm.
again, that lunar and Saturnian principle of impermanence and materiality, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now my spirit is untethered to
Mm-hmm.
create and to multiply in the way that it intended to. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I know that's kind of off topic, but I think that that's
No,
fascinating.
it's really on brand though, because as you're talking, I'm just thinking about, I have the chakra course that I built, that I recreated off of my psychic teacher who passed away, rest in peace, Tom, love him so much.
Hmm.
And, these Pluto experiences are going to be your root chakra work. And it is connected to the parts of the moon which a lot of people will connect to your intuition and your knowing, because it can open up your intuition, like being very lunar, orientating yourself to this kind of intuitive right brain feeling essence will teach you how to channel or be a medium. But you have to completely eradicate things in the root chakra. And the things that I teach in the root chakra is there is no safety and security outside of yourself. It is only within. And it is a very hard meditation, I think, for people to grasp at first, because it will eradicate every belief that you had that you're safe in your home, you're safe with your family, you're safe with your partner, you're safe in your car, right? And I gently go through it, but not so gently also, because it's not supposed to be that much of a gentle topic. It's supposed to really give you that inner security, which is a part of this lunar journey itself. Once you break through that foundation, have a Plutonian experience, your root chakra gets all this new work that is done. But then you really get to open yourself up to your inner world, and where you've been holding on to or blockading yourself from finding like real deep emotional inner security and safety. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like that is such a great segue, maybe into talking about the importance of looking at the moon through the lens of the Cancer Capricorn axis,
Mm.
even outside of the fact that we're having a full moon as we speak. It's about to go exact a few hours after Makayla and I record this episode in Cancer and Capricorn. So
Yeah.
there's never a perfect time, or
Yeah.
there were never a more perfect time, rather, to talk about this. But
It's so funny.
ultimately, it's important, I think, to look at the moon through the lens of what we can understand about her through her affinity with certain signs,
Yeah.
right? So her rulership over Cancer and her exaltation in Taurus, right? Her detriment, or excuse me, her fall in Scorpio, I think is also an important thing to take into account.
Mm.
But
Mm.
this Cancer Capricorn axis, it really is the axis of inner and outer authority,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that in order to find the material authority that Capricorn pursues, right, one must first, Cancer, of course, comes before Capricorn, right? One must first pursue that inner authority, right? Are you able to regulate tough emotions when they come up? Are you able to decipher and distinguish what are the sensations that are arising in your physical body and what they are signaling to you, beyond just, oh, I'm getting a hunger signal or I'm getting a thirst signal, of which some people, when the moon is quite afflicted in the chart, they might not even be able to recognize that. Right? Something as basic and simple as hunger and thirst signals, right? But beyond that, the moon, when people talk about the moon as this planet of intuition and intuitive knowing, the moon speaks to you in sensations, right? She rules over Cancer, which in medical astrology is associated with the stomach, right? The gut feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very lunar experience. Something like the clear audience, for example. I actually think that that would probably be more of like a Mercury Neptune thing, right? Or a Mercury Uranus thing. But like the moon is really clairsentience, right? Like a feeling sensation. Like, so many psychic mediums, they talk about how they're able to decipher messages through the sensations, the physical sensations that they get in their body, right? So when it comes to becoming an authority over your inner world, it really is an authority over your sensory experience of the body, be that emotional, right, or through these sensory signals. And if you are able to master those and live in alignment with them,
Mm-hmm.
and, ultimately the Cancer Capricorn axis is this axis of learning respect, right? We
Yeah.
think about that in terms, I think, a lot with Capricorn, where Capricorn is the general, right? Capricorn is the power that be, right? The authority figure. But Cancer is too, right? And so learning to respect those inner signals and sensations is the foundation that you have to lay in order to go out and do really anything
Yeah.
of meaning and importance in the world.
Yeah. The earth signs are incredibly important when looking at the archetype of Cancer. You know, on the other side is Taurus, which is all about self-perseverance, self-preservation. And what are your needs and what are your values there? And it does come down to the senses about food resources and things like that too under the Taurus archetype, and that is a sextile that supports Cancer. And on the other side is the Virgo sextile, which is what are you doing daily and ritualistically to make sure that those needs are being met. And then, you know, it just funnels into the opposition, which the opposition is always going to come in as a reflection in your life. So if you're just specifically focusing on their fourth house dynamics or your Cancer dynamics, Cancer in your chart, whatever, the opposition is going to come through this reflection of other people or environments, circumstances, of that self-mastery that you have or have not built up to at this point. And it takes time, which is a Capricorn thing. It takes time, it takes growth. Don't expect to be popped out of the womb and know how to forge for yourself and build yourself a house and go to your 9 to 5 at 7 years old, although it used to be a thing, I think, which is very sad, but that's why we have ancestral trauma. But you know, it takes time to learn these things. So I love everything you said. I guess my only thing I would add is I look at this Capricorn symbolism in reflection as like an arc of development as well. Where are you going? What is the long term here? That's why boundaries, for instance, are so important when we talk about Capricorn, because you're going to learn better boundaries. You're going to learn how to protect your inner world, symbolized by the moon, over time. It's going to take you time. You're going to learn who is correct and not correct for you to be in. And you know, earlier I think I mentioned that the other signs that I find are just as important co-creators on this is the other two cardinal signs, which completes the cardinal cross of Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, and we'll put a chart up, Libra, Aries. But the squares coming from Aries and Libra is these relationship dynamics that you're going to be called in when it comes to opening up your inner world. And the biggest thing is that when you are in your Cancer, your emotional world, or like you and I are on a podcast, for instance, or you're listening with this with your friend, it's like your inner world is also in a room with the other person's inner world. And that's that Libra exchange. That's that square there happening. And when people learn and they start to investigate other people's moon signs and what that might feel like, and then you can hang out with your friend and you can understand what their moon sign might feel like, you can actually talk with them and listen to them in such a better way because you're going to understand their moon. And that's why relationships have issues, I think, is because people don't understand their partner's moon, for instance. So you're having this Cancerian experience sharing a room, but you're having the conflict because of the Libra square, the talking, the lack of listening, you know. And on the other side is the verbato coming in with Aries, like the natural spark to just want to take up space, to just want to assert oneself. And so it's very interesting to like kind of look at how the astrology chart is always like working dynamically all at once.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can never take anything in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
It's all in this constant interplay with one another. And I think that I love that you brought up the relationship component as well, because I think that, again, kind of, the modern pop take on astrology, right, has, I think, overemphasized Venus as this principle of relationships and connections, where, Venusian relationships, now, mind you, I think that Venus and the moon are equally as important in relationships, but the Venusian style of relating to somebody is very different from the lunar style of relating to somebody. Venus is, I want you, and the moon is, I need you,
Yeah.
right? And so it's those lunar kinds of relationships that put us in a very vulnerable state. And that's why we get, reactive and touchy with each other in these deeply emotional relationships, because they do feel so vulnerable. And I think you make a great point about talking about how in
Mm.
synastry astrology, or if you're just starting to kind of research your chart and the people in your life, like
Mhm.
look at the moon first and
Mhm.
foremost. No offense, but like fuck their sun. Look at
Mhm.
look
Yeah.
at their
Yeah.
moon because you learn to nurture somebody's moon and safeguard somebody's moon, and that is genuinely the thing that will give you the best of what this person can be, right? Because you know, um, on the opposite side of that coin, when you irritate or provoke or upset or abandon somebody's moon, that's oftentimes when you can get the worst of what that person can give,
Yeah.
right? And I think that, it's also important with the relationship component. Something that was coming to mind was again this like idea about how the moon is memory and how, you know, we oftentimes don't remember exactly what happened or what somebody said, but we remember how it made us feel,
Yep.
right? And that's where the moon is kind of illusory in this way and subjective, right? She is our subjective experiencing of things because the reality is that our memories are never exactly verbatim what was said and exactly action for action what happened. It's our subjective experiencing of it that gets internalized and imprinted through
Mhm.
how it made us feel emotionally,
Mhm.
right? And so I think learning how to do that Libran thing in relationships where Libra is exalted by Saturn, rather, is exalted by Libra, right? This planet of objectivity, impartiality, lack of emotion, right? The search for objectivity in Libra, again, requires that recognition of the fact that the moon is very subjective and that in order to have successful relationships, you not only have to be able to zoom out and detach a little bit from taking that other person's lunar experience to heart or personally, but you also have to do the same.
Yep.
Like you have to, work out your own shit too.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, look at us slapping down the wrist like a
I
good
know.
Capricorn moon today.
we're,
Look
we're
at your
coming in as the
partner's moon.
cosmic police.
I know, seriously. I love it. So should we open with the full moon, I guess, at the
Sure.
end?
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do it.
Yeah. So I briefly looked at the chart this morning, but and then I liked my way of doing is I don't always look at it ahead of time. I look at it in the morning the day of because I have a Cancer moon, so I need to feel the lunation itself. And I started just talking on Instagram stories, and what was coming through me was, and it made sense with the dynamics going on in the chart. And I'm rambling, but you also made a point earlier that you were like, "Hey, I'm going to trigger some people today." Well, it is a full moon in Capricorn, but so that means the sun is in Cancer, but we also happen to have Mercury retrograde in Cancer today, and that Mercury retrograde is square Eris, the goddess of discord. So just be mindful if you are channeling, you're tapping into this full moon in Capricorn. I think the next couple of weeks, especially with Mercury responding to the moon, which means the way you communicate will shift and change based on the moon shifting and changing because she moves about 13 degrees a day. Your communication tactics will shift and change, but also that Mercury is going to make a couple of passes to the goddess of discord, Eris, this trigger aspect. And I find that what happens when Eris gets triggered in the astrology chart is like you might not even realizing that like you're triggering somebody, right? The analogy I use is your best friend just broke up with their boyfriend, but you don't know it yet, and you get in the car and you have a bouquet of flowers and she's like, oh, like where'd you get the flowers? And she hasn't told you, she's like devastated yet, and you're like, oh, my boyfriend just bought them for me.
Right.
So it's like you don't mean to like trigger people. So just I think if we're looking at this lunation, be mindful of that, because also at times with the Capricorn full moon, it shows up as a confrontation because it's a harder type of energy, and we're often being exposed to like a boundary or hit somewhere. You kind of have to have this sobering effect of, hey, this is where I'm at in my life, because I use these lunation cycles as kind of little goalposts, if you will, throughout the year. Where are you at? Checking in, what's going on? How are you feeling? How are your relationships go? What's your goals? How's everything showing up? So it's like a little goalpost. So, but with Capricorn Moon, we might be confronted with some sort of block, some sort of hard conversation, hard emotion, maybe trigger. Okay, you might, again, regression might come back from the past. You might have to deal with something that's a little bit more of a melancholy feel to it. Just I hate to say that about Capricorn moons, because not all Capricorn moons feel that way, and that is not what I'm saying. But as a transit today, there's a little bit of that tone, a little bit of that energy that I was picking up today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was looking at this full moon and I was like, this full moon feels like a major balancing act. And I'll talk about why. I mean, all full moons are, right? In the sense that full moons happen when the sun is opposite the moon.
Mm-hmm.
But can't help myself, always have to talk about the decanic journey of the signs.
I was hoping.
Being and the first decan of Cancer, as well as the first decan of Capricorn, are associated with the Two of Cups and the Two of Coins. Okay. Which, if you know anything about the number two, it is the number of the balancing act, right? So, decanically, these two places in the zodiac are very much areas of, life where we are learning how to balance, right? With Cancer, for one, right, the first 10 degrees of Cancer, it's the Two of Cups, which in a lot of ways people look at as this extremely lovely card, right? You pull the Two of Cups and it's known as like the card of intimacy, right?
Yeah.
It's two souls coming together, right? Two souls blending.
Mm-hmm.
However, it can also be a card that talks about the balancing of two emotional realities, right?
Mm-hmm.
The balancing of two souls, the balancing of two spirits, right? The balancing of two people existing within one relationship dynamic, right? And I think that with the sun being here, it's highlighting, right, and directly illuminating and bringing clarity to some of the balancing acts that we've been doing in our relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some of the ways that we have been learning how to balance our emotional needs against other people's emotional needs, right? And there's a specific clarity and focus that's being brought to that area in particular. And then the kind of subconscious illumination that's happening that has been really, kind of that's coming as consequence to this balancing act that we've been doing in these watery sectors of our life
Mm-hmm.
is the Two of Coins, right? The balancing of the practical areas of our life. What is the structure that we've created? What is it that we're pouring our time, energy, money, and attention into? What have we built, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are we balancing what we want to do in the material versus what we have to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
The image of the Two of Coins, it's this man juggling, right?
Yeah.
It's very much a card that comes up when you feel like you're juggling everybody else's needs against your own, right? Or, the professional pressures against what you really are trying to build. And so I feel like I see this in myself personally. Some of my own inner ruminations that I've been going through over the last few days is very much this dynamic of like, okay, what is it that I'm building in my physical world? What does my mundane life look like? And how has that been influenced by you know, my emotional ties to other people and the way that I've been juggling their emotional needs and the kind of practical ramifications that has for me. Do you know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean?
It's very appropriate, very appropriate. And when you're talking about the balancing act, even environment, because right now I'm balancing myself in between two literal worlds of like moving. And, the ruler of this full moon is Saturn, which is square this full moon in Aries. And a part of that very deep, maybe that's our next topic, Saturn journey in Aries is this reclamation for your own self autonomy. Many people are initiating new chapters in their life, and it doesn't mean that's like a major new thing, although it probably would say it is for a lot of people because of just all the shifts happening in the sky. But it could be that internal shift. It could, and when you internally shift on something, the rest of your life seems to follow through, right? So, one of the other things that came up as you were talking about this is not putting the things that you need to take care of in yourself into somebody else. So it's a good reflection to be like, where am I too codependent? Where do I rely on this other person for external validation or authority or responsibility that I should really pick up on my own? Because again, this squares with Saturn to Aries, which is a very independent sign. It's very do it yourself kind of thing, and give you the power and authority and the strength to know that you have the courage to do whatever you need to do to move into wherever you want to go. So it's like, yeah, if you're feeling unbalanced today, right? If or over the next couple of days as this integration period kind of wanes itself out, and you'll probably feel it more and more, you know, you can bring that back in. You can bring that back into that Saturn and Aries, like to for self autonomy. And it really just takes courage. And you can say it as an Aries. I can say it as an Aries. Sometimes we don't know what the hell we're doing, but we just do it anyway.
Yep.
Like you just gotta figure it out that way. It's okay. Like you're gonna be okay.
Yeah. I had somebody on my stories yesterday ask me if I ever don't pay attention to astrology and I just do things like an Aries is supposed to. And I was like, yeah, I do impulsive shit all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
It's really the fuck around and find out sign. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Um,
100%.
and
Yeah.
I think you make a good point about the ruler of this lunation in Aries, the Saturn in Aries. And also, I'll mention that the lunation itself is square to Neptune, right? So I think
Yeah.
that a lot of people at this time, it feels somewhat confusing, right? Neptune transits, I'll never forget when I went through like some heavy Neptune.
Mm.
It always felt like I didn't even know what next step to take. I didn't even know how to take the next step, right? Like the ground from underneath me, it felt like quicksand, right? It felt like I didn't even see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? Because it was so foggy. And so I think this lunation, whatever this is highlighting for you in particular, will
Mm.
probably have that quality to it where
Yeah.
it's like, I know that something has to shift, but I don't even know what, how, when. I only know the why,
Yeah.
right? Like I might not even fully know the why. And then also with that Saturn in Aries, it's definitely highlighting again, I think this balancing act that I was talking about, it's like further confirmation of the fact that wrapped up in this balancing act is potentially a feeling like you have lost or detached from yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Or from your previous identity, your current identity, that there is a kind of, proverbial or I guess metaphorical death that is coming to this identity that you've built up that's wrapped up in what am I doing in the material and also what am I doing in the relational, right?
Yeah.
What are the relationships that I have right now and what am I doing to make money and support myself and exist in the material world? And that all of these things are kind of coming together as like a oh shit moment, like what am I even building, right? Because what I'm building doesn't align with this new version I'm stepping into as this old version of me is slowly dying off,
Yes.
right?
Yes. It's giving me intense Lord of the Rings vibes.
Yeah.
Like going on this mission where you're not sure how you're gonna go, not sure you're gonna get there. It's all that Neptune realm. Like there's
Yeah.
fucking talking trees and things that can kill you everywhere. And then the deception of putting the ring on, right? It's so valuable. You put so much value onto the ring. You put it on, you lose yourself, you take it off. You're remembering what the mission was, what the relationship was with the people that matters to end the journey. I don't know if you've seen Lord of the Rings, but like,
Yeah, yeah,
okay, I'm just like,
yeah.
this is a like everyone watched the movie, all the movies, and I feel like it's very much that at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as we move into the rest of this year, things are going to start to become more clear, and especially 6 months from now,
Yeah.
when we have the new moon in Capricorn, I think that it will become even more clear, and then eventually the full moon in Cancer. But for now, I think with this Neptunian influence, it is kind of unclear. And I think that, the name of the game with Neptune is surrender, right? Just like accepting that you don't have all the answers, you're not going to have all the answers. It's kind of unclear. Like the more that we try and grasp at clouds, the more they just slip through our fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, right now,
Mm-hmm.
just give yourself the grace to explore some of these feelings. And
Mm-hmm.
again, sensations with Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
You might be having like images come to you, or like Makayla and I have both had like strong dreams over the last like few days. And so allowing these kind of like sensory or, imaginative or dream-like illuminations come to you and not forcing yourself to make sense of them right now. Do you know what I mean?
It's solid advice,
Yeah.
especially with Mercury moving retrograde today in Cancer's realm. So a lot
Mhm.
of people are going to feel that need to go within and retreat and go with your inner world. And honestly, it's a great time to reset you before we hit the rest of the year to feel
Mhm.
where your ego is at. Where's your heart at? Well, that's your sun really too, but like where is your ego at? Where is your soul going? How are you feeling emotionally connected to where you are, who you are, what you're doing, who you're doing it with? Use this Mercury retrograde, use this full moon as a great time for that reflection, internal introspection. We have an episode on ritual. Listen to that, get some tips, ideas, incorporate that, you know, and then you can integrate it. But I agree,
Yeah.
more clarity towards the end of the year because we still have other planetary retrogrades to go through and a new set of eclipses.
Oh
So,
yeah. Oof. We'll have to get into that. We'll
yeah.
have to get into that. One last thing that I'll mention, which I think is really interesting, is that for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Decanic system, look into it. The Decans are so interesting because not only do they have all of their own planetary rulers and their own stories and images, but they also have a tarot card associated with them, and they have a god or a deity or
Mm,
multiple gods and deities that are associated with them. And
mm.
I think it's really interesting that the deity that's associated with this first decan, sorry, I just threw my I think
Excited.
I know. I think it's really interesting that the god that's associated with this first decan of Capricorn, where we're having this lunation, is Asclepius, right? And if you're not
Mm.
familiar with who Asclepius is, right, he's the god of medicine. And so I think it's interesting to think about how whatever is coming up at this time is medicine, and that, like, you know, this is on par with me like starting my journey as an herbalist and everything. But like if you've ever taken any like really potent medicine, like herbal remedies, they oftentimes taste fucking disgusting.
Yeah.
Like medicine, it's only a very modern phenomena that we've been able to make medicine not as like putrid and gross. Like most medicine goes down tough. Like
Mhm.
it doesn't feel good, it doesn't taste good, and yet it creates an opportunity for healing to occur. And so I think that some of the illuminations that people are probably having right now might leave a sour or bitter taste. Do you know what I mean? Like they might not go down very sweet, but ultimately they're setting the ball in motion for significant healing to occur.
I think it's interesting that you actually bring that up too, because we were talking about the dream work earlier, and you and I specifically having intense dreams lately. But Asclepius also had the dream temples, where he would give people the medicine to take to go in and dream and have these prophecies or illuminations really about their life and the deep dream work. So love that you brought that up. That was beautiful. And I'm so excited you're doing this course because it's going to be such juice for our podcast. Yeah, I love it.
I know it's 4 years in the making. I've literally been,
Woo.
I've been trying to find the time, trying to find, the, I guess you could say, bandwidth, yeah, to take this on and do it right and do it well. But it's happening at divine timing, right? As Chiron entered Taurus and it's entering my sixth house, it's about to conjoin my Saturn. So, like, what better a time than to get a certification in natural holistic herbal healing?
Yep, we're here for it.
Yeah.
I love it. We're here for it. So I
Cool.
guess that's us. That's our wrap up for today, I
Yeah,
guess.
I think
Yeah.
that's our episode for today.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you, everybody. We totally appreciate you being here for today's episode. We hope that you very much enjoyed it. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe because it helps our channel grow and helps us keep producing more of this content for you. And with that, thank you so much, Sarah, for an amazing conversation today.
Thank you, Makayla, as always. And thanks to all of you out there watching. We love you all so much and wishing you a very, very wonderful full moon.